I still remember the exact minute everything changed. It was a Tuesday, gray, wet, and just boring enough to match my mood. I had just come home from my shift at the hospital. I work in admin, nothing glamorous, but the 12-hour shifts are no joke. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my keys in the bowl, and collapsed on the couch. The silence was a comfort, until my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it like it had just insulted me. Normally, I let calls like that ring out. But something about this one felt persistent. Hello. I answered, more out of curiosity than concern. There was silence. Then a rasp, barely above a whisper. Emma. A pause. Then, it's your father. Every hair on my arm stood straight up. My brain took a full 5 seconds to catch up to what I just heard. My father. The man who vanished from our lives 15 years ago like a magician who forgot the trick's second half. No goodbye. No note. Not even a rumor. Just gone. What the hell? I muttered, frozen. I'm sick, he said. It's bad. I don't have anyone else. His voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. For all I knew, maybe it hadn't. I could barely respond. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. He kept going, oblivious to my silence. Stage 4. Doctors don't think I'll make it to Christmas. I wanted to see you again. Maybe talk. I ended the call. I didn't even say goodbye. I didn't tell anyone for 2 days. Not my best friend Hannah, not my coworkers, not even my mother. The irony was unbearable. For 15 years, I had trained myself not to feel anything when people mentioned fathers. I'd watch friends cry over the loss of theirs, talk about Father's Day with glowing smiles, or groan about overbearing dad jokes. I had nothing. No grief. No joy. Just an empty space where a father should have been. And now he wanted to pop back in like a forgotten save file in a video game? No. Hell no. But of course, curiosity is a stubborn little bastard. By day 3, I caved and told my mom. We were sitting in her kitchen, her arms deep in soapy dishwater, humming to some 80s love song playing from her cracked radio. Mom, I hesitated. I heard from him. She froze, hands underwater. Who? She asked, but her voice already knew. Dad. The silence was suffocating. The only sound was the gurgle of the sink drain. She turned slowly, her face unreadable but her eyes sharp. He called me. He's sick. Dying, apparently. She stared at me. And I don't know what to do. Her lips tightened. She turned back to the sink and scrubbed like it was her father on the plate. You owe him nothing. That should have been the end of it. And for my siblings, it was. When I texted them, a simple, hey, Dad reached out, he's sick, my brother replied with a single word. Block. My sister sent me a vomit emoji. But I couldn't shake it. I lay awake that night replaying the call in my head. His voice. The way he said my name like it was a prayer. The crackling quiet behind his words. What did he want? Forgiveness? A caregiver? A witness? Or maybe, just someone who remembered he existed. A week passed before I told Hannah. We were at our usual Thursday spot, a little pub off 9th Street, dim lights and cheap wings. She listened without interruption, nursing her cider, lips pursed in thought. Look, she said, setting her drink down. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But whatever choice you make sure it's your choice. Not out of guilt. Not out of some false sense of duty. Your life isn't a second chance for him. That landed hard. Because deep down, I didn't want to see him. I wanted to forget he ever called. But there was something clawing at me. A need for answers. To understand. Not for him. For me. Why did he leave? Where did he go? And why now? Why now? I finally gave in and called the number back. It went straight to voicemail. His message was haunting. You've reached Paul. If I don't answer, I'm probably sleeping. Or worse. If you're calling me, thank you. I hung up. What kind of person says, or worse, like it's a joke? 2 days later, I got a text. Hi, Emma. If you're willing, I'd love to see you. Even once. I'm staying at Rosewell Hospice on Glendale. That was it. No pressure. No, please help me die in peace. Just an address. I told myself I'd go once. Just to look him in the eye. Just to ask the questions I deserved answers to. I wasn't doing this out of compassion. I was doing this because I needed closure. Because the ghost who left me without a father was now asking me to be his daughter again. And I wasn't sure if I was going to say goodbye. Or finally say what the hell happened. The Rosewell Hospice was tucked behind a faded shopping center, like someone tried to hide sadness behind a strip mall facade. The building looked like every other hospice you've ever seen. Sterile beige walls, plastic flowers and plastic vases, and an eerie calm that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I stood outside in the drizzle, trying to convince my legs to move. My hand hovered over the door handle. Just one visit, I whispered to myself. 1 hour. In, out, done. I stepped inside and immediately regretted it. The place smelled like bleach and artificial lavender. A woman at the front desk looked up at me with the kind of sympathy reserved for the walking wounded. "Can I help you?" I hesitated. "I'm here for Paul Mason." Her eyebrows rose just slightly. "Room 112. Down the hall, last on the right." Her voice softened on the name, like it was familiar. Room 112 was dimly lit. A small window cracked open just enough to let in the smell of wet pavement. The man in the bed looked like a skeleton wrapped in old flannel. Gray beard, hollow cheeks, oxygen tube clinging to his nose like a leech. And still, I knew it was him. He turned his head slowly, eyes cloudy but sharp. "Emma," he croaked, like saying my name took effort and courage. I nodded, stepping in. "It's good to see you," he said. "You look just like your mother." Those words hit like a stone, not because they were kind, but because they were lazy, predictable, generic. "I came because I have questions," I said, pulling the only chair in the room next to the bed. "This isn't a reunion. Don't get it twisted." He smiled weakly, and I hated that it reminded me of my own smile. I figured. We sat in silence for a long time. I could hear the machines more than I could hear him breathe. "Why did you leave?" His face tightened. For a second, he looked like he might lie. Then he let out a dry, almost apologetic cough. "I was a coward," he admitted. "And a fool." I said nothing. I wasn't ready for what being a father meant. And when your mom and I started fighting more, I panicked. I thought leaving would hurt less than staying and failing. "You didn't even say goodbye," I said. "You just vanished." He nodded slowly, eyes closed. "I know. I've spent every year regretting that. You could have come back. Wrote a letter. Called. Anything. I thought it was too late. That you'd all moved on. And then I got sick. And suddenly, being forgotten didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like punishment. I hated how human he sounded. I wanted him to be a monster. A clean villain I could point to and say, "See? This is why I don't need closure." But sitting in front of him, the only thing I could feel was the weight of everything he wasn't. He wasn't there for my first heartbreak. He wasn't at my graduation. He didn't even know I'd gone to nursing school and dropped out after 2 semesters because I couldn't handle seeing people die. He didn't know me, but he was still my father. "You said you have no one else," I said finally. "No friends? No other family?" He shook his head. "Not ones who would care." A pause. Then he added, "I burned too many bridges too early. And now you want me to help you die in peace? I want you to see me die as a man who knows what he lost." That silenced me. I left that day more confused than I had been going in. Hannah was waiting for me at my apartment when I got back. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and let me collapse into her couch. "He looks like death already," I muttered. "Would you rather he didn't?" she said. "No. I don't know. Maybe. Did you get what you needed?" Not even close. But the weird thing was, I went back. Over the next week, I found myself returning to room 112 like it had gravity. I told myself it was for closure, but I didn't ask more questions. Instead, I brought books, sat in silence, and watched old game shows on the tiny TV. He told me bits and pieces about his life after he left. Odd jobs, short stays in Arizona and Montana. A failed second marriage. A short stint living in his car. More mistakes. More regrets. "I thought about you every Christmas," he said once. "But the longer I stayed away, the more I convinced myself you were better off." "You were wrong," I told him. "I wasn't better off. I just learned how to survive without a dad." That made him cry. Then came the letter. I found it taped to my door one morning, right before work. No envelope. Just a single folded sheet of lined paper with my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Emma, I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope I gave you some kind of truth. If I don't wake up tomorrow, know that I'm proud of who you became. You're stronger than I ever was. I'm sorry, Dad." I stared at the paper so long my coffee went cold. When I visited him that night, he was worse. His speech was slurred, his hands shaking, and the nurses said he'd had a turn. "He doesn't have long," one of them told me gently. "Maybe a day. 2 if he's lucky." I sat by his bed again, holding the letter in my lap. His eyes fluttered open. "You came back." "Yeah," I said. "Still haven't decided if I hate you or not." He smiled. "Fair." Then he looked past me, eyes unfocused. "I had a dream last night. You were 5 again. You were building a tower out of Legos, and you told me it was going to be taller than the sun. I didn't want to leave that dream. I swallowed hard. You shouldn't have left that life. I know. The hospice called me at 3:12 a.m. I knew the moment my phone lit up what they were going to say. Still, I waited 3 rings before answering. Maybe part of me hoped they'd tell me I was wrong, that he was awake, asking for more pudding or something. But no. Emma? I'm sorry. Your father passed away in his sleep about 20 minutes ago. I didn't cry. I thanked the nurse, hung up, and stared at my ceiling until the sun came up. It was strange, he was gone, but I didn't feel anything immediately. No relief. No sadness. Just quiet. As if the static that had buzzed in the back of my mind since his call had finally shut off. I took the day off work, called Hannah, and went back to Rosewell to collect what little he had. His room looked emptier than I expected. The TV was off. The bed already stripped. A cardboard box sat on the table labeled Mason, personal items. Inside, a tattered copy of The Grapes of Wrath, a half-used notebook, a bottle of aftershave that smelled like something from a gas station, and a sealed envelope. It had my name on it. I didn't open it right away. Not in the hospice, not in the car. I sat on my bed, the box on the floor, the envelope in my hands like it might bite me. My fingers trembled as I peeled the flap open. Inside was a letter. His handwriting was messier than I remembered, like he'd written it in the dark. Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Maybe that's for the best. I didn't deserve to die with you at my side, not after the way I left. But there's something you need to know. Something I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I was scared of what loving you would cost me, and what I was asked to give up. Your mother made me choose. I stopped reading. My pulse hammered in my throat. I reread that line twice, then kept going. Back then, I was drowning in debt, jobless, and drinking more than I should have. I'd been a mess, sure, but I wanted to fix it. I begged your mom to give me time, to go to rehab, to get clean. But she told me if I didn't leave by the weekend, she'd make sure I never saw you or your siblings again. She said she'd tell everyone I was abusive, that she'd file a report. Even had fake bruises once. I think she was scared I'd drag all of you down with me, and maybe she was right. But she didn't just push me out. She made sure no one came looking for me. She told you I abandoned you, that I chose to disappear. That's not true. I was told to vanish. So I did. I dropped the letter. My hands were shaking. I stood up, paced, sat down again. Every memory I had of my childhood started to fray at the edges. Had I believed the wrong villain? I called my mom that afternoon. I didn't tell her why, not at first. Just that I needed to talk. She sounded chipper, casual, even a little surprised to hear from me. Everything okay? Not really, I said. I just came back from Rosewell. He's gone. A pause. I see. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. He left me a letter. Nothing. Not even breathing. He said you gave him an ultimatum. That you told him to leave or you'd take us away and never let him see us again. When she finally spoke, her voice was brittle. I did what I had to. Did you lie to us, Mom? I protected you. No. I snapped. You rewrote history. You let me hate him my entire life. And what would you have done if I didn't, she said. Watched your dad rot in rehab? Let him drag you through court battles? Lose the house? Your school? Your future? I would have had a choice. That's all I wanted. The truth. Not the sanitized, righteous version of it. Her voice softened, almost breaking. He wasn't stable, Emma. He wasn't ready to be a father. Maybe not. But you weren't supposed to decide whether he got to try. I hung up before I said something unforgivable. The rest of the day felt like molasses, slow, heavy, impossible to push through. I reread the letter. Then the notebook. It was full of unfinished thoughts. Letters he'd never sent. To me. To my brother. To my sister. Most of them started the same way. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but... I read one where he described the first time he held me, how I wouldn't stop grabbing his nose, how he cried when I laughed for the first time. Another where he begged me not to remember him only as a ghost. That night, I had a dream. I was sitting in room 112 again, except it wasn't bleak. It was full of light. My dad wasn't sick. He looked like someone I barely remembered, a man in his 30s, healthy, smiling. He handed me a Lego tower and said, "Look, it's taller than the sun." I woke up crying. At the funeral, barely a dozen people showed up. A few nurses, a neighbor he'd befriended from the hospice, a man named Jerry who claimed he once lived in the same shelter as him. None of them had family ties. None of them owed him anything, but they showed up anyway. My siblings didn't come. My mom didn't either. I didn't speak. There was no eulogy, no slideshow, just a plain box and a priest who read from a script. And yet, I stayed until everyone else left. I sat there beside the casket, alone, in the cold. Because for the first time in my life, I saw him not just as a failure of a father, but as a broken man who had once tried and been erased. 2 weeks after the funeral, the silence had started to rot. I thought closure would feel like a door closing softly behind me, a gentle end to a lifetime of questions. Instead, it felt like being locked in a room with nothing but mirrors. Everywhere I turned, there was another version of myself staring back, asking, now what? I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating much either. I'd show up at work, float through the day like a ghost, then come home and sit in the dark. Sometimes I read the letter again. Other times, I just stared at it, the words burned into my skull. She told you I abandoned you, that I chose to disappear. That's not true. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily I had hated him, how natural it had felt, and how strange it now felt to mourn a man I didn't even know I'd loved until it was too late. Hannah noticed. Of course she did. You're spiraling, she said bluntly, one night as she handed me a mug of tea. And before you say you're fine, you haven't made a real meal in 10 days. You've lost weight. You barely text. I stared at the steam rising from the cup, then looked up at her. What if I hated the wrong parent? Emma, that's... No. Just let me say this. My voice cracked. I spent my whole life believing I was abandoned, that I was easy to walk away from. It shaped everything. The way I trust people. The way I keep them at arm's length. Every relationship I've ever ruined. It came from that story. And now, what if that story was a lie? She sat beside me. Didn't say anything. Just let me tremble in the silence. I feel like I don't know who I am, I whispered. You're someone who survived, she said. And now, maybe you get to rewrite your story. The next day, I did something reckless. I drove to my mother's house. I hadn't been there in over a year. She lived in the suburbs, in the same 2-bedroom ranch-style home she'd scraped and clawed to keep after Dad left. My siblings had both moved states away, but she never left. Never changed. Not even the curtains. She opened the door with that same cautious smile I'd seen all my life. The one that said, let's pretend everything's fine until it explodes. Emma, she said, surprised. I didn't expect. We need to talk. We sat in the living room, across from each other like we were two strangers waiting on a late bus. Her mug of tea steamed between her hands. I hadn't even touched mine. I pulled the letter from my bag and handed it to her. I want you to read it. She looked down at the envelope. Her fingers hesitated. I know what it says, she muttered. Then say it to my face, I replied. Silence. She set the letter on the table, untouched. I did what I thought was right. You said he abandoned us, that he didn't care, that he was unstable. But the way he wrote about you, about how you made him choose, I don't know what to believe anymore. I protected you. No, I said, my voice rising. You decided for me. You took away my father and replaced him with a ghost I was supposed to hate. And I did. For 15 years. I hated a man who wrote me birthday letters he never sent. A man who sat in that hospice alone and told strangers about the daughter he hadn't seen since she was 10. My mother's lips quivered. He was a drunk. A mess. You saw the best parts of him in those letters. I saw the worst. You should have let me decide for myself. Her eyes filled with tears. And if you'd gotten hurt? If he'd fallen back into it? You think I could have lived with that? I stood. I couldn't sit still anymore. You were supposed to be the strong one. The honest one. But you lied, Mom. You controlled the narrative, and now, I don't know who to hate. Or if I should hate anyone at all. She reached out to touch my hand. I pulled away. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said. But I needed you to hear this. I needed me to say it. I didn't storm out. That would have been dramatic. I just walked to the door, quietly, like I was leaving a room I'd spent years trapped inside. Outside, the sky was bruised with the soft gold of dusk. I took a deep breath. For the first time in days, it didn't feel heavy. The next few days were a blur of sorting, cleaning, and rereading the notebook from the hospice. Most of it was journal entries, little memories, half sentences. Some were sad, some sweet, but one stuck with me. I wish I had known what kind of woman she'd become. I imagine she's fierce, maybe guarded, but brilliant. Always was. I cried when I read that. Not just because it was kind, but because it felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever said about me. A week later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box. I opened it to find a gold chain, a simple necklace, the kind you'd find at a roadside pawn shop. There was a note, in the same shaky handwriting. Your mom gave me this the day you were born. She said when you turned 25, I should give it to you. I didn't get the chance. But now you have it. I hope it means something, even if I didn't. Dad. I clutched it to my chest like it was something sacred. I wore it for the first time the next day. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was the first thing he ever gave me. And somehow, the last. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slowly, like it, too, was reluctant to let go. But when it finally gave way, the world felt new in that unsettling way, fresh, but unfamiliar. Trees budded too quickly, birds chirped too early, and the morning sun crept through my blinds like it was trying to catch me off guard. I hadn't visited the hospice since the funeral, but one morning, without planning to, I drove back. Room 112 had been scrubbed clean. Fresh linens, new flowers on the sill, and a smiling old woman in the bed who wasn't my dad. I didn't go in. Just lingered in the hallway, watching the door like it might open on its own and bring him back. Can I help you? A nurse asked softly behind me. I turned. No. I'm just visiting a memory. She smiled sadly, the kind of expression people wear when they recognize grief in someone else. He talked about you a lot. You were his favorite story. That hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know I was a story, I said quietly. Oh, you were the main character, she replied. Back at home, I went through the hospice notebook again. There were only a few blank pages left, but I flipped to the last one and wrote, Hi. I don't know if this will find you, but I hope it does, in some way. I'm trying to forgive you. I'm also trying to forgive her. Mostly, I'm just trying to forgive myself for not knowing who you were sooner. I stopped, thought for a moment, then kept going. You weren't perfect, and maybe you were never meant to be my hero, but you were mine for those last 2 weeks, and that counts for something. When I finished, I tucked the notebook in my drawer. I wasn't ready to part with it, but I wasn't hiding it anymore either. My siblings didn't want to talk about him. When I told my brother about the letter, what it said about Mom, he shrugged. That was a long time ago, he said. Does it even matter anymore? I didn't push. He had built a life out of forgetting. I had built mine around a lie. We were not the same. My sister didn't respond to the text, not even the follow-up. That silence said more than words ever could. 1 month after his death, I received an envelope from a small attorney's office in New Mexico. Inside was a legal document, brief, impersonal, typed in Times New Roman. My father had left me something. Not money, not property, just a storage unit key, and a note scribbled in the margin. For what I couldn't say out loud. I almost didn't go, but something in me needed to know. Not for closure, not even for peace, just to see the rest of the picture. The unit was in a dusty little town called Las Secas, 2 states away. I made the drive over a long weekend, alone, with nothing but podcasts and too many gas station snacks. The place was exactly what you'd imagine. Sun-bleached, gravel lot, chain-link fences, a bored teenager behind the counter who handed me the key without even looking up from his phone. Unit number 14. The metal door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Dust spilled out in a lazy cloud. I braced myself. Inside, it wasn't much. A few boxes. Some furniture. An old guitar case. A duffel bag. I sat on the floor and started sorting. The boxes were filled with fragments of a man I barely knew. Receipts from cities I'd never been to. Journals. Sketchbooks. Even a few Polaroids, mostly sunsets and highway signs. But in one of them, he was smiling. Alone, standing in front of a desert mural, holding up a gas station burrito like it was a trophy. There was something in that smile. Something that said I tried. The guitar case was empty, but the duffel bag held something unexpected. A box of cassette tapes, labeled in his handwriting. Emma, you're 1. Emma, you're 2. Emma, you're 3. They went up to 12. Each one was dated. Each one said the same thing on the back. I missed you this year. I held the first tape in my hands like it was glass. My throat was tight. My vision blurred. He had talked to me. Every year. Even when I thought he'd forgotten me. Back at the motel, I borrowed a tape player from the front desk. The first tape crackled to life, grainy and quiet. Then his voice. Hey kiddo. Happy birthday. You're 1 today? You probably won't remember me, but I hope. I hope someday you'll hear this. He laughed nervously. I saw a little girl in the park today who looked just like you. She had your eyes. She fell in the sandbox and started laughing like it was the best thing in the world. I think you'd do that too. I cried. For the first time, really cried. Because he hadn't disappeared. He was just out of reach. I stayed up that night listening to all 12 tapes. They were full of stories, jokes, bad impressions, little updates about his life. He even sang once, off-key and earnest. By the end, I felt like I had grown up with him in some parallel life. And maybe, in some way, I had. I brought the tapes home. Not to hide, but to share. One afternoon, I invited Hannah over. We sat on my couch, wine in hand, and played Year 4. We laughed. We cried. She held my hand through the part where he told a joke, so bad, even he groaned. That's love, she said softly. Recording something for someone who might never hear it. I think he always hoped I would, I replied. I didn't forgive him completely. Not yet. But I didn't hate him anymore either. That space where pain used to live, it wasn't empty now. It was complicated, messy, real, and human. On what would have been his birthday, I went back to the hospice with a new bouquet. I left it on the front desk with a note that simply said, "For room 112, in memory of a man who tried." Then I walked outside into the sun. The necklace he gave me shimmered against my collarbone. I didn't need to carry his shame anymore, just his memory, and the sound of his voice, forever caught in magnetic tape, telling me he never stopped loving me.